Welcome to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook for June. In a minute, Aaron Wilson, who happens to be the state climatologist in Ohio and at the Ohio State University, will be giving that presentation. Thank you very much. And just a few other sort of logistical tidbits here. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see, if you're used to Zoom, this is no big deal, but at the very bottom, there's a Q&A button. That's where we're kind of pushing everybody to put stuff. We've kind of taken off the chat, and we're going to use the Q&A for, you can make comments in there as well, but if you have questions as we go along, please ask whatever you want to ask. I am hosting this with Dennis Toddy, who is the director of the Midwest Regional Climate Center. No, Midwest USDA Midwest Climate Hub, and with Brian Fuchs with the National Drought Mitigation Center, who is actually hosting this Zoom. We're probably gonna next month. We're probably gonna move to a more permanent home, if you will, for these. Probably also at the National Drought Mitigation Center. So thanks to them for allowing us to continue to do this. I do apologize. I know this is a holiday for some folks, and hooray for those who get on here on your day off. Sorry about that. But this is the day that the Climate Prediction Center releases all their information. We kind of like to stick to our schedule. We're, pretty stuck in our structure in terms of that. And so every third Thursday of every month, we do this, and we'll continue to do this for as long as I can see. So anything else I need to mention to anybody? Did I leave anything out? Dennis, Brian, Aaron? No? Okay. Nope. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll answer the questions at the end. That's the one thing I did want to say. So if you have anything you want to ask, please do. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, certainly on this Juneteenth holiday. To think about and reflect on the end of slavery, of course, and then continued push toward racial justice and equality. So if you were typically in the rotation, I do June, and if you were on last June's webinar, I had this infamous pig, or at least it became a little infamous afterwards. I thought I'd sweeten it up a little bit more this time instead and go with the northern catalpa, which certainly, if you think about June in Ohio, and I know catalpas throughout a large portion of the region, you can almost smell this picture, I would imagine, out there. They certainly have been beautiful, and it's something that I look forward to each and every year when summer starts coming around. It's sort of that start to summer transition here for us here in Ohio. So per usual, we're going to get into quite a bit of things today, but first we certainly want to thank all the groups that are always providing great information. We work closely with the state climatologists throughout the country, throughout the North Central region as well, but American Association of State Climatologists, NOAA, Dennis, and others, other directors of the USDA Climate Hubs, the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers, and of course the National Drought Mitigation Center. Our next, as Doug alluded to, we'll have some more information about where, but when will be our next webinar is on July 17th at 1 p.m. Central. And this will be delivered to you by Jeffrey Andreessen, state climatologist there in Michigan. And for all of those OSU fans out there, I'm going to include the M. Looking at, any past drought climate webinars, you can still get to those through the links that are provided there. And as Doug mentioned, we'll be providing questions, taking questions, and hopefully giving you good answers here at the end of the presentation. As always, this is a huge area, right? We're covering Colorado to Ohio. We're covering Missouri and Kentucky all the way to the Canadian border here. And so we've got a lot to cover. Maybe a little bit quieter than some other Junes, but certainly there was plenty of different activity we want to get into. So we'll focus on some recent conditions, look at the growing season progress. Then we'll take a look at impacts and notable events, and there are several, and some state rundowns of impacts happening around the region. And then we'll end, as always, with our outlooks, looking at the short term, but also the long-term outlooks through the rest of this upcoming summer. This is just one of the many photos of a very photogenic tornado that was taken toward the end of May. Right after last month's webinar, we actually had a flurry of severe weather activity right during, the same day, and then a couple days later. This is just a really nice photo that I captured from the National Weather Service page there near Denver. So we've had some severe weather. We'll go into that as well. Just thinking about climatology a little bit and pull some of those events out. So recent conditions. This is a picture from my colleague here in Ohio, and this pretty much sums up what May looked like here across the Eastern Corn Belt region. Most of us picked up anywhere from 18 to 21, maybe 22 days of rainfall throughout the month of May. Not always heavy. Some areas, even with a lot of days of rainfall, didn't see a lot in terms of quantity, much above average, but other areas were pretty inundated, and the maps will show that pretty well. And of course, when you get this many rainy days, of course, that's going to have an impact on farming and agricultural activities, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So first, we'll start with the May temperature recap here. This is looking at the statewide average temperature ranks for May 2025, ranked against all years since 1895 for the same month. And as you can see, you see a lot of white in our states here, extending from Colorado eastward through Kentucky, Ohio, up to Wisconsin and back over to Nebraska here. So the bulk of the rankings are really near average. And what's kind of interesting about it, and it won't really be reflected here or reflected, I think, in the temperature anomaly map or differences compared to average that we'll see in a moment. But there was some flip-flopping going on here during the month of May. For instance, Wisconsin, very hot start, very hot, dry, high fire danger earlier on in the month. And of course, then that flipped toward much cooler conditions toward the end of the month. So even though it's average, it certainly captures a lot of, or doesn't very well illustrate the variability that many of our states experienced during the month. The warmer rankings, the above average rankings, as you can see, that's shaded in the lighter red, pinkish, orangish color, I never know what to call that, was really across the northern Great Plains and upper Midwest. And fortunately, Montana is the only state to crack the top 20 warmest, but also that led to some early snowfall, or sorry, early snow melt as well across that portion of the country. And so that'll play into what we talk about when we get into our rivers and streams and stuff a little bit later on. I did want to show the differences between, the rankings when it comes to statewide maximum, daytime high maximum temperatures versus overnight lows here. So again, generally, outside of, well, let's start with the maximum temperature ranking. So these daytime highs, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, shaded light blue here, below average daytime highs, just really reflecting how cloudy and how much, rainy these areas have been or were during the month of May here. Again, most of the area, it's still similar to what we saw in terms of the statewide average, but a little bit cooler in those daytime highs. Um, the northern tier of states, the Dakotas, Minnesota, back into Montana and Wyoming, warmer both in daytime highs, warmer than average in terms of higher rankings here and daytime averages and minimum temperatures as well. But the only cool nighttime temperatures there for the month of May was down in Kansas. So 36th coolest May on record for overnight lows during that period. So differences, we usually have a gradient set up somewhere across this region, and this time it's oriented from northwest to southeast with warmer than average conditions across the northwest and cooler conditions here in terms of these statewide maximum temperature rankings there. Looking at the kind of expanding out to the whole spring season here, March through May. Overall, because really certainly here in the East, a very hot start to our spring season back in March and early April. Most of the region is above to much above in terms of these rankings. And so some of them getting into the top 10 warmest season springs on record. Most states are in the top 20-ish or so. And we can see Montana there coming in with the seventh warmest spring on record back to 1895 for Montana. So again, a lot of variability. We typically see variability in the springtime, but certainly big differences between how we compared to normal in March versus our May month here of recent period. Looking at the precipitation recap, again, variable conditions across the region, a little bit of back and forth depending on where you were. So dry rankings, 20th driest May on record there for Iowa, 26th for Wisconsin, and 42nd driest there in Minnesota. So very dry conditions, especially early in the month with high fire risk and very dry conditions there. Above average rankings uh, over in Ohio, over here in Ohio and Kentucky, and then also across the Dakotas. Primarily, as you'll see in a moment, the central North Dakota into North Central South Dakota as well. But generally, those areas were above average in terms of their rankings, and elsewhere where it's white, the white shading there is near average overall for May precipitation. Again, expanding it out to the full season, more areas really picking up closer to average or above average for the spring. Again, highly variable conditions across the region, generally wet south, Missouri over to Kentucky, fourth wettest spring on record for Kentucky there, and then up into Ohio and into the Great Lakes. Below average rankings for Nebraska and Colorado. So very dry spring in those locations. We've seen some recent improvements, as we'll see in a second, but certainly with the drier drought type conditions existing out in that part of our region. This is largely the reason why we've started that way this season. Just to kind of break it down a little bit more and look at the counties and really stick out where the worst of those dry conditions were for the March through May. You see those individual counties, very dry band across northern Kansas, southern Nebraska, getting over into far northwest Missouri, southeast Nebraska, in far southwest Iowa there with those counties in the much below average precipitation for the springtime, much above across or to even record wettest across southern Missouri, southern Illinois, into Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and then up into the Great Lakes. And so, again, variable conditions across the region, and just wanted to show that the year to date, January through May, Kentucky really stands out there, 131st. So wettest year on record in terms of year to date on record. You just go across the river there, and Illinois is having its 44th driest year on record so far. A lot of that primarily northern Ohio, or sorry, northern Illinois, but the big differences there. Kentucky really sticking out in terms of the year to date records here so far. All right, so switching gears, getting a little bit more recent now. So not just looking at the whole month of May, but basically since our last webinar, looking from mid-May to mid-June. This is from the High Plains Regional Climate Center, looking at differences compared to normal over the last 30 days. And you see a lot of greens, you see a lot of blues, and even some purples on the area on the map here for the bulk of our states in the North Central region. So widespread, cooler than normal temperatures across this region. The dark green is basically 2 to 4 degrees below the long-term mean. The light blue getting it down to -6 or 6 degrees below average there in many areas. And then you really have to go farther west to get abnormally warm conditions across, again, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. So overall, May, very cool, very slow, growing degree day accumulation during the month for many of us across the region, and just kind of the issue there in terms of cool conditions generally across much of the North Central region. Looking at precipitation over the last 30 days, so we're going to start on the left-hand side. This is the actual quantity here. So we've got some pockets of very heavy precipitation totals across southeast Kansas, southern Kansas, over into southern Missouri. So those purples are really looking at 9 to 12 inches in general of precipitation over the last 30 days. But still heavier rainfall across southern Illinois into central Indiana, much of Kentucky as well, very wet conditions. And then even farther north into kind of central Nebraska, we see again what was very dry conditions over the earlier part of the spring. Certainly, we've seen improvements in that state of recent. And then you can see the heavier precipitation across far northeast South Dakota there over into Minnesota. We'll show a picture of from Big Stone Lake up there in just a moment, and then down into north central Iowa. So those are areas that have picked up quite a bit of rainfall over this period. And you can see compared to normal on the right-hand side, many of these areas are running anywhere from 150 to 400% of normal. On the flip side, much of Michigan, Wisconsin, certainly as we get down into northern Indiana, Illinois, over into Iowa, and then back in through much of the Dakotas over the last 30 days, precipitation has been generally lighter there, so anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 or 4 inches over that period of time. And looking at compared to average, again, worst compared to average is really across the far northern tier of our states and in the northern portions of those states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota over into northern Montana. But those dry conditions existing elsewhere where you see those oranges and yellows as well. So those areas running anywhere from 25 to 75% of normal over the last 30 days. So how does that then translate to our soil moisture? We sort of have this banding of wet, dry as we move from south to north here. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is CPC calculated soil moisture ranking percentile. So, very high percentile rankings here in terms of from southern Kansas, Missouri, these areas that we've been talking about that are really saturated. That really dry band extending from eastern Nebraska through southern Iowa into northern Illinois, up into the Chicago area and then northwest Indiana. That area has been very dry, and soil moisture certainly is below the median historical record there. And then again across northern Minnesota and in northern North Dakota. Recent rains have improved conditions there in southern North Dakota, northern South Dakota, and western Minnesota as well. So I do show the change over our season here. So looking from the end of March now until June 17th. So again, you can see where these areas are getting drier. So these areas that have low soil moisture ranking percentiles here have been getting quite a bit drier since the end of March with pretty saturated conditions there in the south. The USDA top soil moisture percent short to very short, and this is for the week ending June 15th. Not the worst that we've seen at this time of the year, but certainly it's reflecting those wetter conditions across the south, getting drier as we head into Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and then even drier yet as we head out and toward to the central and northern plains here. So 65% of that topsoil moisture short to very short there in Montana as well. So thinking about sort of this is the time of the year where evaporation or the loss of soil moisture or surface moisture to the atmosphere can be quite strong, especially when obviously temperatures are warm. And so we think about what is the thirst of the atmosphere, and this can often be a precursor for water stress and crop stress. So thinking about how much moisture the surface is losing to the atmosphere here, and looking at the 1 month evaporative demand drought index here for June ending June 11th. It's overall kind of a low demand across the region as a whole. So you could see some lightly yellow colors here or light blue. These are sort of in that middle range. But as you head toward our northern tier of states here, Montana over into Minnesota, certainly around Lake Superior, these are really showing higher kind of demand or potential for water stress in those regions. And again, a lot of it's been decreasing. So on the right-hand side, this is the changes in the 30-day here, ending on June 12th. A lot of the greens indicating not, kind of a decreasing demand in that water need from the atmosphere and really reflecting those cooler temperatures and rainfall that's been falling across some of those areas as well. So that's what we're looking at in terms of that thirst. Now, this is about to change pretty rapidly, I think, as our temperatures are expected to warm quite steeply here over the next couple of days throughout next week. But overall, that greatest demand right now, and perhaps some drought, at least concerns continuing or worsening, is really across those far northern states in our region. So this is the latest U.S. Drought Monitor map that was released this morning for data through this past Tuesday, just to kind of get the picture overall for the United States here. So certainly higher drought severity there in the Southwest and across portions of Texas. In our region, most areas are either severe drought or less, and we've got quite a bit, again, of our southern area that has now shifted out of drought conditions or are improving with some areas that are kind of maintaining that. So let's zoom in on the North Central region here and look at the latest map. Again, these areas extending from Montana down to Wyoming, parts of northeast Colorado into the western sections of Nebraska, South Dakota, and northern stretches of Kansas, continue to maintain the moderate drought to severe drought conditions D1 to D2 in some of those areas. And that really extends again across northern Missouri, southern Iowa, and then more moderate drought conditions there across northern Illinois and northwest Indiana. Although these regions, even over the last couple of days, have picked up some really locally heavy rainfall with the system moving through here over the last couple of days. Farther north, again, even though that thirst for the atmosphere map that I showed you in terms of EDDI looks ominous, right? I mean, we still have abnormally dry to moderate drought conditions over parts of Minnesota, North Dakota, and then western North Dakota, and a little bit more severe conditions there back into Montana with the warm, dry conditions throughout the month of May. Looking at the change maps, this is the 4-week change map on the left-hand side, so how we've changed since the last webinar here. Again, improvements over western North Dakota, much of South Dakota into portions of Minnesota, back into Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas. So a lot of those areas seeing 1 or 2 class improvements in terms of the U.S. Drought Monitor over the last 4 weeks. A little bit of degradation there this month over northern North Dakota in that drier area, and again parts of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana as well. I just threw the 12-week in there just to look at our changes over the last 3 months, and again improvements kind of highlighted in those green areas, but some worsening conditions overall, at least to where we were 12 weeks ago in those aforementioned areas on the previous map. All right, so let's look at our snow, rivers, lakes, and fire and kind of run through these pretty quickly. I pulled this picture because I pulled the same camera last year up at Glacier. I think this is the Hidden Lake Trailhead, and it was just buried in snow. Lots of snow up there last year. Just came off another big snowstorm. Not the case this year. You can see lack of snowfall even as of today, although obviously it's still out there. It's still melting as we transition into our summer season. But I'm so looking forward to going to Glacier with the extension retreat coming up, or sorry, extension conference coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we're going to escape afterwards up to Glacier and can't wait to see that. So, looking at the rivers here, this is I should say the 28-day stream flows just by Huck region. And the greens and blues are going to show areas that are normal to above normal, so above to much above normal across the Ohio River Valley, where it's been very wet of late, west through southern Missouri into southern Kansas as well. The red and orange, these are indicating below to much below normal still across northern Minnesota, parts of northern Wisconsin, and the UP of Michigan there. And then much below normal still in terms of stream flows across Kansas, well, really across eastern Colorado, southern Nebraska, northern Kansas areas where some of that flow certainly into the Missouri and things is below average, and a little bit of water restrictions in some of those locations as well. So there have been notable improvements in this over what was shown by Justin last month, but certainly these areas continue to run below expected flows for this time of the year. Getting a little bit more detail now about the individual basins across our region. Overall, the Mississippi concern is pretty low. St. Louis, or at St. Louis, is about 8 feet below normal for this time of the year, but there really is no major concerns or water restrictions there. No really major water concerns for low water issues over the next month or so along the Mississippi. Ohio River's the same. We've been seeing pretty above normal flows with all the rain coming out of Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana, but likely to scale back to normal as we get later in the summer in August and September, according to the guidance there from the Ohio River Forecast Center in Southwest Ohio. A little bit more detailed look at the system storage comparison in the Missouri basin, again, where sort of the trouble child in terms of the river basins. Not really, but we're talking in terms of these conditions here. Part of this reason, kind of the lower snow melted out pretty quickly this year, a lot earlier than usual. so that, we had that peak, but then that's no longer the case. So the system storage there in the Missouris, according to the Corps, is at 51.8 million acre feet. There have been recent rains across the basin, but the soil moisture dried out during the first half of June. And again, the mountain snowpack is nearly melted in both reaches there above Fort Peck and Peck to Garrison. So you can see probably the last time this season we show the snow melt maps and the snow water equivalent maps here for the webinar. And then on the left, top left, you can look at the comparison of the system storage. So the red line is 2025, been running below the average of 1967 to 2024, and that's forecasted to continue throughout the upcoming season. So we're expecting lower flows there along the Missouri Basin, Missouri River here in the central part of the U.S. Turning our attention to the Great Lakes, those cool temperatures in May have certainly led to cooler water temperatures across the majority of the lakes here, certainly Michigan, Huron, and down into Lake Erie, cooler than what we typically see for this time of the year. So, those that were participating in Father's Day activities along the lake shores here, pretty chilly temperatures compared to what we typically see. Um, of course, one of the things that we're concerned about in all of our lakes and water bodies throughout the Midwest and North Central region are harmful algal blooms. There is an official Lake Erie harmful algal bloom for the Western Lake Erie Basin coming up at the end of June in terms of a forecast, but I'm showing the predicted bloom severity based on the latest preliminary analysis. And it's expected to be here pretty mild to maybe moderate in that 4.5 range here, 2.5 to 4.5. That's a mild to moderate bloom, similar to 2016, or maybe even last year's moderate bloom conditions. So somewhere in that range. Yes, it's been wet in Ohio, but across Northwest Ohio, flowing into the Maumee River, northeastern Indiana, those areas have not been as wet as other areas to the south, and so there's not been as much of a flush of water into Lake Erie this spring season. Looking at the water levels here, and I'm just going to show you two water levels. This is uh, the Lake Superior water levels there on the left, Lake Erie water levels on the bottom on the left there. So similar to last month, really water levels below the June long-term average on Lakes Michigan, Huron, and also Superior. So Michigan, Huron not shown here, but below the long-term June typical values. Lake Erie is slightly above the June long-term average, but there's no major concerns here. Certainly coming down from the highs of several years ago. And the forecast is by next month, Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron are forecast to rise. Lake Erie is expected to fall slightly from its current level. So that's what is sort of that typical seasonal transition and differences between those lake bodies, but nothing too out of the ordinary here in terms of our Great Lakes levels. A little bit about fire, certainly, setting up the conditions that we've seen already in terms of what we've observed and kind of the forecast and some of the things. The July outlook, so this was issued by the Predictive Services here on the 1st of June. So significant wildland fire potential outlook for July is certainly above normal and elevated, where it's been very dry across Montana. And then also northern Minnesota as well. So fire potential there has been high. Of course, we've had some fire, but across the north central region, but acres have really come down a bit. We had some early season fires in Wisconsin and Dakotas, but those have kind of restricted or retracted just a bit as conditions have gotten a little more moist out there. And then extending into August, you see sort of an expansion of that above normal fire risk into parts of the Dakotas, into Wyoming as well. So this is something we'll have to keep an eye on as those conditions expand or evolve throughout the summer, and we'll see how those forecasts and outlooks here in a moment kind of play out for the next couple of months. All right, quickly, growing season progress. This is a capture of sort of wheat status in northern Ohio, and you'll see some wheat status in southern Indiana and see kind of the difference across the region a little bit. This is a photo I took yesterday on a field day out there. But let's run down some of our crop progress as sort of has been the story, things have been lagging quite a bit, especially for the eastern portion of the corn and soybean belts here. So still a bit below that 5-year average across portions of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and then also over into Kansas, those areas being a bit below in terms of percent emerged. And as a matter of fact, we didn't have planted. We still had not as many acres here in Ohio as in 2019, but certainly we had some acres that were not able to be planted out there as well. Other areas, if you look out parts of Dakotas, Minnesota, the corn progress in terms of percent emerged is a bit ahead of schedule there. Overall conditions are okay, especially in the western portion. So Iowa, out in the Dakotas, Nebraska, Missouri, doing okay. Illinois doing okay as well. Not much below that change over last week in terms of conditions here in the east, although there is a slight kind of downgrade there in Indiana and Kentucky. Looking at soybean progress, similar to corn in terms of condition. I'm not showing condition here, but again, those areas of Kansas, Nebraska, and then the eastern portions or eastern states are showing a little bit of a drag on the percent planted and also the percent emerged. All of the crops this year certainly didn't look great here in the east as they came out of the ground, until they really could tap into some of the nutrients there in the soil and are certainly starting to look a lot better than they did about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So things are improving a little bit here as we've had a little bit more window to get progress done with, kind of conditions still slightly ahead of schedule there in terms of both planted and emergence across the northern tier of our counties and central states as well. Couple of others just to quickly look at winter wheat progress in terms of percent harvested. So this is really just getting started. That's why I pulled this one today. Just getting started across the southern region from Kansas to Missouri, Illinois. Hasn't started over here in Ohio just yet. But a little bit behind the 5-year average, especially a little bit more than a little bit as you head into Illinois there at 14% difference compared to average. But a little bit of a slow start in terms of harvesting, not because it's not ready, but because it's been impossible to get into the field and get that out of the field. And that's caused some other issues, and we'll highlight a photo here in a second. Spring wheat progress, a little bit behind there across the northern tier of our states as well. And then looking at pasture conditions, as you would expect, kind of in the good to excellent condition, a little bit behind there or sort of lagging across Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska where it's been drier, a little bit better farther east. All right, switching now to notable events and kind of do a state rundown here. Many areas, as we typically do in the month of May and June, see pretty large hail events out there. This is a photo from Dale Lentz with the Bureau of Reclamation there in Missouri Basin region out of Billings, Montana. Billings was certainly hammered this week with deep hail, drifts of hail, along with some pretty big stones here and a lot of damage across that region. And some other areas have experienced some of that severe weather as well. So we'll get back to the severe weather in a second, but just thinking about overall notable events, we can't ignore our smoke events, not because of fires directly here in the United States, but the Canadian fires again. And I'm sure many state climate offices and other offices throughout the upper Midwest were, up across the North Central region in the Midwest, we're answering questions about, okay, is this going to be just like 2023, or is it going to last? Some of those questions that we can't. We can certainly conjecture about or think about the conditions that we see out there, but the smoke was certainly a big impact. This is the USA Today headline from May 30th. Heavy smoke expected to hit the U.S. as the Canadian wildfires certainly forced folks to evacuate up there. It did hit. Obviously, we had some prolonged smoke events, and just kind of working from left to right here, looking at some of these events. This is kind of an interesting analysis looking at the solar radiation in southeastern Iowa here on May 31st. The blue line, this is just the amount of solar radiation between May 31st and June 1st in terms of time of day. And the orange line is June 1st. So as that smoke moved in, just a clear indication that solar radiation was decreased because of the thick smoke there. A couple of pictures there on the right-hand side. So Minnesota, this is the Minnesota Public Radio picture out of the Twin Cities area there, just really thick smoke. Um, Made for some beautiful sunrises and sunsets. So courtesy of Doug Cluck, a nice red glowing orb in the sky from sort of that wildfire smoke impact there across that region. And of note, some of those areas in Minnesota were getting up into AQI, air quality index, in the mid 240s or low 240s there, which is unhealthy for everyone. We dealt with a lot of that in 2023. Looking at the highest PM 2.5 air quality index there in Madison. You can see that this was not quite as high as 2023 there at 268, but 171 certainly getting into that unhealthy range for many folks. So as far as a severe weather kind of summary goes, we had about 4,700 storm reports per May across the U.S. That's actually 1,500 fewer than last year. If you remember last year, we had certainly here in Ohio tons of tornadoes by this point, almost 70 in the state, but a lot more active outbreak last year. Not to say it's not been active. 4,700 storm reports is quite a few. We've had several rounds of all kinds of severe weather types across our region: tornadoes, hail, wind. What's interesting, and I'm kind of pointing out Iowa here, so Justin Gleason and the Iowa State Climatologist pointing out that no tornadoes were reported in Iowa this past May. And that's the first time since 2010. Kind of unusual not to have some tornado reports out of that state in the month of May. We had several significant events, again, just as we were delivering the webinar last month and just after. So a big outbreak in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan on the 15th of May. May 16th, extending from Missouri over into Kentucky. You can see the photo that was submitted to us by Chip Zimmer there in Kentucky, kind of a drone photo of what was eventually rated EF4 from London to Somerset, just tearing through the Daniel Boone Forest there in Kentucky. Quite impressive photo of that type of damage as well. And then May 18th, the eastern Colorado through Nebraska and into Kansas as well. And even recent events, even yesterday, with a pretty strong squall line moving through much of the Midwest and the eastern portions of our area, with a lot of wind damage and some hail and tornadoes as well. So kind of going through the states here a little bit, thinking about putting all this stuff together and capturing some images of what we've looked at. South Dakota, generally, variable northeast to south in terms of the rainfall and conditions. A lot of the flooding conditions confined to northeast South Dakota. And of course, that then gets into the Minnesota River via the Big Stone Lake, Minnesota here. This is just a photo at the Ortonville Dam showing some of that flooding that's still receding across that portion of the state. Reports of some disease issues with those wet conditions in wheat, but no real big issues with livestock, and really some improved water quality in the ponds and such across South Dakota. Southward to Nebraska, improving drought conditions there. Some crop and pasture conditions are decent overall compared to average. Climatologically, kind of low numbers on severe weather, even for Nebraska, even though there was some severe weather there as well. And then into Kansas, again, sort of that flip-flopping thing about warmer conditions and advancing growing degree days and seasons, but more recent chill has kept soil temperatures low. Behind on 90-degree days, and I don't think a lot of folks complain too much with that, but of course it does have impacts in those areas that are expecting the heat. And again, with those water issues that have been long term, we still have, despite recent rainfall and improving conditions, stage 2 water restrictions in the Wichita area, even though those reservoir levels are improving. One of those tornado outbreaks did drop a pretty powerful and horrific couple of tornadoes there in Kansas. This is a picture out of Grinnell, EF3 there in May. Moving a little bit more eastward here, we'll start in Iowa there in the middle. So some replant and crop hail damage reports out of that area. Did have a pretty heavy rain event in Des Moines on May 18th of 5 inches. Not directly correlated to that, but more because there has been, a flush of a lot of nutrients into the waterways. Right now, there's a lawn watering restriction still in place there in Des Moines due to high nitrates and the inability to process enough water for water quality and water drinking purposes. So, not a drought related water restriction, but certainly ties to some of the spring conditions that we've seen. This photo is from, basically as I think machine gun corn here, or kind of just torn up from some hail damage across the northern portions of the state. Popping over to the left here, this is Hans Schmitz out of Indiana. Some replant across the state. I mentioned the wheat, not being able to get out and harvest the wheat. So you can see the wheat laying over, which makes it a challenge. Heavy rains, even this week on some drought ground there in Northwest Ohio and Northwest Indiana and Northeast Illinois. So overall, those wet conditions, 18, 20, 21 days of at least a trace of rainfall, keeping folks out of the fields in terms of wheat and also planting. And of course, weeds love this stuff. So generally across the region, we're seeing an influx of weeds. So that will be a growing concern as well, moving forward. And then finally, Wisconsin here. Always great photos out of Wisconsin State Climate Office. Thanks, Bridget. This is a 4-inch hailstone here near out in Eau Claire County there. So 4-inch hail that happened. This was a state that did experience a lot of the flip-flops in temperature. So early 90-degree days. So just, Kansas mentioning kind of late on the number of 90-degree days. Wisconsin started their season really early, about a month early. But then cooled off quite dramatically. And we saw that across our northern tier of states as we went from early May to late May. And then again, we mentioned the air quality index there in Madison. All right, so finally, we'll get into the outlooks here of what we expect coming up. And of course, we tend to start with our INSO, or El Nino Southern Oscillation status, and how we're looking for the upcoming season. We are still in INSO neutral conditions, conditions across the tropical Pacific. So generally the area there off the coast of South America into the Central Pacific, we look for sea surface temperatures and how they compare to the long-term average. And we can see they're close to average here, and typically what we see under INSO neutral conditions. And so there's not really a strong atmospheric then signal or influence in terms of our long-term pattern. And when you look at the probabilities as we move forward here in these 3-month periods throughout the upcoming season, INSO neutral conditions are likely across the northern hemisphere during our northern hemisphere summer here in 2025, and they may continue into the winter as well. Confidence is kind of lower, certainly this time of the year as we project out into next fall and winter. We're not going to have very high confidence. That's just a matter of fact. But there is some, slight indication based on models and other things that, again, there's still more likelihood or probability of seeing INSO neutral, but the probability of La Nina does increase just a bit as we head into the fall and next winter. So that's something that we'll deal with and contend with as we get closer to that period of time. So over the next week, how do we shape up in terms of precipitation? And so, overall, we're shifting into generally a very hot pattern across a bulk of our region here. So we're going to have high pressure set up across the Ohio Valley and then into the southeast United States this upcoming week. And that's going to do a couple of things. It's really going to heat things up for a lot of us in terms of the flow as we build heat from the south here across our region. And it's also going to interact with some tropical moisture. We've had Hurricane Eric there in southern Mexico. And it's likely this moisture is going to start to be pulled up and pulled up throughout the monsoonal region and then into the central U.S. here. And so as a frontal boundary sort of sags south into the weekend across Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, that tropical moisture teaming up with this is could it's in the forecast here for perhaps some heavy rainfall amounts here, 2 to 5 inches across portions of that Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin area. Really giving a chance for the southern region, Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Ohio, maybe not so much Kentucky, but getting to dry out just a little bit. But again, this is the areas where heat and humidity are going to be the major concern. So this is the precipitation forecast. And so if this was to come to fruition, obviously we've got some areas there with some considerable amount of rainfall. Again, the big story also is the heat and the heat risk. And so this is the risk map from CPC looking at the period of June 26th through the 28th. So a large area of our eastern portion of our central region here, Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky, and then including Indiana, Ohio, at least a slight risk, but more moderate risk for Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Southern Michigan, and Kentucky there in terms of seeing extreme heat. And the National Weather Service heat risk tool certainly lays that out as well. The purple categories are magenta, rating of 4. This is extreme level. And I would also add here, these are areas in the east that have been, really cool. Not, none of us are necessarily acclimated. It is summer. Obviously, we're going to start to see a lot more heat and humidity, but we've not seen a lot of it. And so this could have a potential, obviously, big hazard on human health across all of our region here coming up. The latest Climate Prediction Center outlooks, this is a period for June 26th through July 2nd, shows much of our region, even probabilities leaning toward or likely above average, certainly likely above, coming off this heat wave upcoming there in the eastern states, but most of us, CPC is expecting leaning to or likely above average temperatures here for that period of June 26th through July 2nd. And with that comes, lower probabilities, obviously, of precipitation exceeding normal or above average or wetter conditions for most of us. Maybe a little bit higher probabilities as we get into Wisconsin, the Great Lakes region, northern Illinois, Indiana, those areas, Michigan, northern Indiana, northern Illinois, parts of Iowa could see, this would be beneficial in terms of helping to mitigate any worsening drought conditions across that portion of our region. Expanding that out now, the initial look for the month of June in terms of temperature and precipitation probabilities. We see across the southern tier, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, into southern Ohio, sort of equal chances of above, below, or near normal. Those are areas that have been more saturated. They're wetter. That tends to keep your daytime highs maybe a little bit lower, although overnight lows can be quite warm with a lot of that moisture around. But that's what we're seeing in terms of the outlook for temperature. As you head farther north, and even farther north and west, the probabilities for warmer than average temperatures are higher out in that portion of the country. And with that also comes the probabilities here. The initial look at July, generally leaning toward wetter or above normal precipitation there in the east for the month of July, leaning toward or getting into maybe low end likely categories there for below average precipitation across Montana, Wyoming, and stretching out into the Dakotas and northern Nebraska. So we see that difference across our region. And then later in the season, looking July, August, September, again, this is a 3-month period. It's what CPC would project this would look like at the end of September. That doesn't mean that July or August, wetter or drier, couldn't happen. But overall, we're looking at, most of us, or all of us, leaning toward above average temperatures for this upcoming summer. And along with that, precipitation probabilities, again, that east leaning wet, north central, northern Great Plains, leaning toward below average precipitation for the 3-month period. Again, when we look at the whole 3-month period here at the end of September. The latest U.S. drought outlook, given those outlooks, then some improvements in the green or removal of drought, perhaps across those areas of northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, northern Indiana, also up into Michigan, and back into that south central Iowa, north central Missouri. Perhaps drought persisting there in the Central Plains into Nebraska and Southern Dakota, Southwest South Dakota there, and then again even up into Montana. Could be some drought development as well, and out in Montana and Wyoming, where those conditions are projected right now to lean toward below average precipitation. So kind of the overall outlook summary in the short term, we've really got this above normal heat that's kicking in, humidity, summer heat will prevail, most likely throughout the summer here, but certainly for some of us, this is our first intense heat. By the weekend, we've got triple-digit heat forecasted now. Heat indices getting well above 100 degrees for many folks throughout the region. So we just need to be mindful about that in the short term. A little bit longer term, we have INSO neutral conditions throughout the summer, so we're not really looking toward the INSO influence very much here. July temperature probabilities leaning toward warmer than average across the north central region, except the south, right? And that's really strongly, we've got wet soil moisture signals remaining there, so a little bit of mitigation on those temperatures. July precipitation leaning above average for the eastern part of the region, below average in the west and north. And this is in response to the conditions that we've seen. So current soil moisture conditions and temperatures, but also some expected atmospheric flow during the month of July. So it's likely any major drought outbreak that might occur. Certainly our first attention is going to be given there to the North Dakota, Minnesota, over into Montana, where those areas are already dry and haven't seen kind of that recent improvement. So that's the area to likely to be affected first. But as we know, 2-3 weeks of dry weather, we can start getting pretty dry soils throughout our region. We certainly don't tend to make up soil moisture deficits in the summer, but we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on those areas. The central eastern corn belt's looking decent throughout July, so no major concerns right now there. And as far as river flows, Mississippi, Ohio rivers likely to remain fine, but we'll continue to watch Missouri, and the forecast really trailing those normal levels there. So that's what I had for you today. Certainly, you can get the recorded presentations available at those links, and that'll be available shortly. Want to thank all of the partners that work with us to do these things, this webinar each month, and I certainly always appreciate the opportunity to accumulate and kind of analyze the entire region. It's actually, I don't know, I find it very, very fruitful, very beneficial for me, and just like to be able to present. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. You can reach out if you have any questions, and I'll turn it back over to Doug. Thank you so much.
All right. Hey, thank you, Aaron. We'll keep this relatively short. Thanks for the great presentation. Can you go back? We're going to go back to a couple different things, and then we'll kind of get to the questions. But go back, yeah, there, right there. Whoop.
Yeah.
Drought Outlook. We'll start with that.
Sure.
So, this is just Aaron may have clarified this a little bit, but this is the depiction of drought by the end of this period. The end of this period is September 30th. That is where drought is predicted to be by that date. Okay, so that's sort of the end date. What can happen between now and then is a lot more drought over a lot more areas, right? So there are short-term droughts that can definitely have implications and impacts and all that sort of stuff. So just because this shows, all the Midwest and most of the central part of the U.S., for the most part, drought-free. There's, lingering drought in places that aren't expected to get better in the brown. The yellow areas are expected to develop drought. It doesn't mean that there won't be more drought. Okay, that's all. And as temperatures warm up, it's typical for this time of year, unless we're in a rainy year. If you all remember 2019, that was one of those years where the rain would never stop. Unless you're in a year like that, drought will develop somewhere. It may not be the worst case drought, but it'll definitely have repercussions. Anything you want to add to that, Dennis? Or
And,
or
and
Aaron
note that we
or
and
Brian?
note that we are not projecting another 2019. We're using that as comparison right now.
No.
We
Okay.
have to have our analogs.
We do. We do. And we should ignore them. Okay, let's go back to the heat for a minute. And if I guess go back a few slides. And what the projection here is for well above normal temperatures. Yeah, the hazard one. That's a good one. Starting probably today or tomorrow with a lot of wind behind it across the plains, and then that heat sort of moves east over time. The good thing is the heat moves east over time. So places like, I don't know, what did I see? South Dakota are going to get into the hundreds for a couple days, and then they're going to be in the 70s for a high. So that's great, except when you have these massive changes, it's hard on some, people and sometimes livestock and even plants for that matter. But it is a short term, at least in the Central Plains and maybe into the Western Midwest. It's going to be a relatively short term blast of heat. Dangerous nonetheless, but it's not going to be one of those long lasting things. Aaron, you have more to add to that though.
No, I was just thinking, I mean, I could have showed the Saturday heat risk tool, which would have shown, more concentrated concern there across the Central Plains and in Dakotas. By Monday, as you can see, they're completely out of the warning area or heat risk area. So that just kind of highlights what you were talking about in terms of the shift toward cooler conditions relatively quickly. The heat could persist a little bit longer, of course, across our southern stretches, right? So.
And we should probably say the heat index. I think Dennis wanted to talk about that heat index.
Yep.
So Dennis, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, because Aaron was mentioning triple digit. That is over most of the area. It's the heat indexes that are going to be triple digits. The Central Plains could hit hundreds, low hundreds actual temperatures. Nonetheless, Aaron was right that it's going to be very dangerous. And the map on the right shows the high danger level because of the increased temperature and high dew point.
And even after those dates, it's not going to get remarkably cooler in that area. I think that's the other thing to say. Go to the 8 to 14 real quick, would you?
Yep.
So the end of that period, July 2nd, early part of July, all that orange area is above normal. So, it's summer, heat's gonna come. Now that's above normal heat, remember. And in some places that are so soupy right now in terms of water and wet soils, they will be primed for incredibly moist conditions in the air. So yeah, just wanted to put that in there. Questions. I guess we had just a few. Brian explained a little bit about the drought monitor map and the S and L letters that are on those maps. They do stand for short and long term. And it really is, as Brian says, refers to impacts from both there are both short and long term impacts from drought in those areas. Someone commented on them liking this platform. Don't get used to it. We may actually go to yet a third version that we can do all the tricks and things that we'd like to do with it. Appreciate you enjoying this one. And then the last question was, has the quality of your data sets changed based on recent Doge cuts? And for the most part, the data hasn't changed appreciably. That may change over time, but as of the moment, pretty much the incoming information is the same. What has changed is the ability for people like me, when I was working for NOAA, to go out and engage publicly. Since I'm retired, I can do this. So anyway, that's the engagement and collaboration stuff publicly is what has been dampened down, at least for the short term. We'll see what happens in the future. Doesn't mean we're going to stop doing these, by the way. So Aaron, next year we'll be back enjoying his time in the sun, so to speak.
Yeah. Maybe another pig photo or something else. We'll see.
We'll see. don't predict the summer. Oh, the other thing about predictions in the summer is without it, even when there is a fairly strong ENSO El Nino La Nina thing going on, summer is really difficult because there's a big disconnect. And this summer is even harder. So I'm not saying ignore the outlooks. They mean something, but I would say the confidence in those outlooks. And why don't you go to the seasonal outlook for fun? The seasonal outlook, I would say, is look, cross our fingers on all these things, right? And don't put all your money in the stock market based on these. But nonetheless, that's our best guess. That big sort of lower probability of warming, especially in the southeast, is mostly because of all the rain that they've gotten. So when there's a lot of wetness, it tends to dampen the temperature, not necessarily the dew point. So that's the other thing is what we really should have here is a heat index outlook, because that would be interesting to see, actually.